This conference will now be recorded.
It does seem a little exciting. You have to show where you're losing and which one.
You know, to go to presenter mode on. It's under, go to slideshow on the top. And then custom slideshow, or from current slide.
From current slide?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So thank you for coming, everyone. We'll start out with item number 2 on the agenda, is an opportunity for public comment. So if anyone has anything they want to say, freight related, feel free to speak up, both here or on the, do we have anyone on the virtual meeting?
No one is on virtual.
Okay. So then we'll move on to item number 3, which is the staff update.
All right. So we have our schedule for upcoming KTMPO meetings there for TAC and the policy board. Other than that, a few updates as far as grant programs out there. So the Department of Transportation just reopened their multimodal project discretionary grant opportunity in PDG. It's a NOFO, but it's 3 different programs basically. One is called MEGA, and that's $1.8 billion, large complex projects for national or regional economic mobility or safety benefits. So anything to do with highway, bridge, freight for our purposes, but also passenger rail, public transportation. Funding for that. There's infra, another part of it. This is the highest funded portion of this NOFO. This is for multimodal freight highway projects of national or regional significance again. And then lastly, the rural program, which is for any type of service transportation infrastructure in rural areas that increase connectivity or improve safety and reliability of movement of freight and people as well.
Deadlines are?
What?
You know what roughly the deadlines are?
Yeah.
September, October.
I think I put it in there by.
That's okay. I'll look at it. I just didn't know if you know off the top of your head.
Yeah, but it just opened relatively recently, so it's
Railroad went up in September and closes.
okay. All right. From the state, we also have the TCEQ, their Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Program. They have what's called an all-electric program in there, which is grants to local governments, individuals, or legal entities. Just all about replacing diesel-fueled vehicles with all-electric models, as well as the supporting infrastructure for those. Governments can apply for 100% of their incremental costs. Non-governmental applicants can request up to 75% of those costs. There's a few bills that were signed into a law from the last legislative session. One of them was House Bill 4885. So that one goes into effect in September, and that creates the Texas Hydrogen Infrastructure Vehicle and Equipment Grant Program. So it's what it sounds like, funding the purchase and installation of infrastructure, vehicles, or equipment that are powered by hydrogen. House Bill 1846. This is for skills tests, so commercial driver's license tests. So it allows the state to provide a skills test for people who have a learner's permit, a commercial learner's permit from another state. And then other news, the FRA is going to be opening in September their railroad crossing elimination program. This was also open last year. So we'll see what changes there are on the newest NOFO since it hasn't been released yet, but previously it offered grants of up to $1 million for local governments and political subdivisions of the state for grade separation or closure, track relocation, and other types of safety projects for grade separation or closure. And lastly, we're going to talk about this a little later on the agenda items. The Texas Delivers 2050 Freight Mobility Plan was approved by the Texas Transportation Commission. It's been submitted to FHWA for final approval. So we're going to talk about that. We were unable to secure the speakers. We've tried, I think, 3 meetings now to get somebody from TxDOT to speak about the plan. We had them here in our first meeting, if you remember, back in April of last year. So I'll be kind of giving an update on that. And yeah, the last slide, I think we have the air quality report. For some reason, it's not moving now. Nita, can you hit the forward arrow? Yeah, batteries may have died or something.
Or she clicked away from them. And the PowerPoint isn't in focus.
But that's essentially it for the staff update. The last part's just the air quality graph. So we can go ahead and move on if there aren't any questions.
There we go.
Come up.
Yes, there we go.
All right. So on to agenda item number 4, which is discussion action item regarding approval of meeting minutes from the April 25th meeting. Any questions on that? The motion to approve, second? Miguel Bar seconded? Yes. If that was an option, I would have taken your bid. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes, minutes are approved. Next thing we have, number 5 is presentation on autonomous vehicles and freight with Zeke Reyna.
All right.
Take a long walk around. Howdy, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zeke Reyna. I work at the Texas Department of Transportation down in Austin in our strategic planning division. In that division, we have a small group that works on emerging technologies. So what that means is basically everything you're seeing in the news that's out there, we dip our toes in, whether it be automated vehicles, advanced air mobility, so eVTOL drones, those kind of things, AI, data, whatever it may be, we're starting to get into it more and trying to see how, one, we need to prepare as a state for preparing our infrastructure for what's coming, and then 2, how we can use data or possibly even AI to help improve safety and efficiency on our roadways. So I come from a legislative background. I worked at our state capitol for about 15 years. Went over to TxDOT to get away from politics and got pulled right back into it. And I basically do all the policy stuff that our government relations team doesn't want to touch. So I'm not sure how that happened, but AV became one of those things. So back in 2017, well, actually, I'll kind of jump in a little bit, and I'll get to that. But I say CAV, connected and automated vehicles. Kind of a general term, but connected, just that. Whether it be vehicles talking to each other, infrastructure, or everything. You'll hear the term C-V2X. That's everything talking to everything via cellular. And then automated or autonomous, depending on what level of automation we're at. Vehicles that drive themselves, or in most states currently, we're still helping, we're still testing, sitting in the cab, things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But the thing to note is that Texas is arguably the AV capital of the country. I think we're the AV freight capital in the world. I don't say that lightly, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. But we have AV testing going on and AV deployments going on in 20 of our 25 districts. Actually, that's 21 of our 25 districts now. So it kind of gives you a rough percentage of how many things are going on all over the state. Whether it be AV freight up in the upper left, long haul freight moving from city to city on our interstates, going across to personal delivery devices. When I talk about freight, I talk about from the warehouse to your door. Every step in between, first mile, middle mile, last mile. That last mile includes those little personal delivery devices, or in that case, a neighborhood electric vehicle, delivering everything from groceries to pizza, because pizza seems to be a hot item, medicines, whatever it may be. We've got, kind of going below there, drones, eVTOLs, that's actually up in the Fort Worth area. Bell is working on both military and civilian applications. And then next to it, inland ports. As we know, we have a lot of inland ports here in Texas, some of the largest in the nation. And ports, inland ports are really a hub of AV activities at a level that kind of caught us off guard with the amount, how long they've been doing things there. So in Texas, we have 4 laws that really govern our AVs. The big one is the first one up there. Back in 2017, the AV community and all kinds of stakeholders worked together with our legislature to pass Senate Bill 2205. This was really our backbone, our foundation of AV law. What it says is that any AV, as long as it meets the same safety and insurance standards as a regular vehicle out there on the roadway, is allowed to operate in the state of Texas. The second one is basically that, but for connected vehicles. Then 2 years later, we passed our smaller delivery robot bill, and then back in 21, we passed a bill that basically said AVs don't have to have all of the equipment that a standard vehicle would need. So some of the mirrors, things like that. There's nobody sitting in the driver's seat. They don't need those things. So as long as that bottom one, they have to meet certain federal standards, and we've been working with FMCSA on a lot of those things. But to sum all those up, what you get are a series of laws that are very business friendly, very come and work here. And the AV community grabbed it and ran. We've had AV deployers moving in from all over the world and all over the country wanting to come and operate and deploy, test all levels here in Texas. So one of the things that our governor did back in 2019, he directed TxDOT through a press release to create a connected and automated vehicle task force. This task force is designed with two key functions. One, to make sure that we are preparing our state for the safe and efficient rollout of AVs, and then also, are there any kind of legislative updates that we need to make for these? So when we announced this, we immediately had well over 100 stakeholders reach out and want to be part of it. And one of the first things we did is kind of create what we call just a voting block. And really it's those players who are most active in the state at the time. These different companies have all been part of this in some shape or form. And what we tried to do when we built out this voting group was to have representatives from the full spectrum. So whether that be AV freight, whether it be technology companies, our research institutions, or other state DOT or state agencies involved, we wanted to bring everybody to the table, those who are really actively engaging in it. And it's taken off. In that time now, at our peak, we were well over 200 members. We've gone down a little bit because there's been some consolidation in the industry. But on the right, you can kind of see the different types of membership types that we have. When this first launched, you may notice the date. Once we really got this going, it was late 2019. In early 2020, we just happened to come up with the idea of creating subcommittees, and the pandemic hit, so we're all working from home. And it created an opportunity for us to have smaller groups getting together virtually. So we kicked off 5 different subcommittees, all with really long names, because we wanted to try to link in as much as we could into different ones. Ones that this group may be really interested in would be our freight delivery, our safety, liability, and responsibility, and then our education, communication, user needs. And the reason I note that one is that group's working on a communications plan. How do we interact with the public and all of these? We come back and incorporated a 6th one, future workforce and economic opportunity, because one of the things that we found about AV is it's growing at such a rate that it's starting to create its own infrastructure and economy. Whether that be those who are directly involved, so the techs who are working on the trucks, those who are in their ops centers, things such as that, to supporting industries, those who are building the technology that goes into this. So one of the things that we've actually seen a lot of these companies interacting with junior colleges and universities, and now starting to go down to K through 12 level, of introducing this and preparing that future workforce pool. Okay, so AV freight. AV freight in Texas is huge. On I-45, we have 5 companies running. The number fluctuates throughout all of our roadways and on 35. And they're operating at what is level 4 technology. So you start level 0, that's your basic car that our grandparents drove. Once you start introducing technology such as driver assist, lane assist, backup assist, things like that, then you get to level 1 if you have one. If you have more than one, then you're at level 2. So my wife's Hyundai has a bunch of them, and it's an L2. So I can put it on. It'll keep me in my lane. It will let me know if somebody's backing up, or if somebody's crossing behind me while I'm backing up. It detects people coming. It does all kinds of fancy things. That's an L2. That's where the majority of vehicles are right now. L3 is the most dangerous one because that's where people will start taking their hands more and more off the wheel. Some would say that Tesla's teetering in that L3. There's a Mercedes that's starting to look at L3 and they're doing a little testing in California. But then you start getting into the real automated levels. That's L4 and L5. Level 4 is where the vehicle drives itself, but there may be situations where a human may need to interact. And then L5 is full on, you can take a nap and read a newspaper and the car will get you where you want to be. L5 is probably the farthest away. It's still 5-10 years away. Right now, where everybody's trying to get to is L4. L4 is where you can be out of the vehicle can drive itself, and do so consistently, safely, and meeting all the requirements that are out there. AV freight, and there's a couple of AV passengers that are really starting to get close to that level. And some of the players who are on the screen here, we've got multiple companies operating in Texas, but it's kind of been an interesting dichotomy of companies coming and going, because as with a lot of startups, you have consolidation of the industry. A lot of these guys started out with venture capital money. Money's drying up. Things are not going as fast as we all thought they were going to originally. But the biggest companies that are out there are all operating with Fortune 500 companies. They're making runs every day, hauling everything from the mail to frozen goods up and down our roadways. One of the bigger ones, the truck up on the upper left, is a company called Gaddick, which is going up and down 35 right now, hauling goods for Tyson, basically chicken nuggets. They're moving up and down 35, as they call them, poultry pucks, and with CR England trucks or loads on the back of their trucks. On I-45, well, here, I'll hop on here. This is an idea of where these trucks are. It's not the best map. I'm working on a better one, but it kind of gives you a sense of where these trucks are. So here's 35. The big one operating on 35 is Kodiak. Kodiak is the red truck. If you ever see them going down the interstate, they've got a big K on them. And a lot of times, especially if they're hauling their own tractors or their own, I know I'm missing my word here. It'll say Kodiak on the side of the container. Thank you. That's the word. But you may also occasionally see other vehicles that are moving up and down 35 because these trucks are constantly doing demonstrations for clients and things like that. I-45 is our big one. So between Dallas and Fort Worth, Kodiak, Aurora, Waymo, Wabi, and another one that I can't name yet are all operating or about to start operating. Kodiak, Aurora, and Waymo have been operating for a couple of years. Now, what I mean by that is they have depots off of I-20 and I-45 just south of Dallas, and they have depots right north of Houston, typically on Beltway 8. And what they're doing is they're making runs from the depot to depot, and a lot of the times they're doing it with zero disengagements. So what that means is they have safety drivers in their vehicles currently. There's a really bad joke about how you can tell an AV truck from a regular truck. It has two drivers in it. Because right now they're driving with a safety driver and then somebody who's working on a computer who's constantly watching what their sensors are seeing. So these trucks all have LiDAR, they have radar, they have multiple ways of seeing what their surroundings are. So a lot of times what these companies are doing, and some of them are actually, as soon as they leave the depot in AV mode, and the driver just sits there all the way to Houston, and a significant number of times they're not having to engage with the vehicle. A lot of times when they do have to disengage, turn off AV mode, it's because of work zones, it's because of heavy traffic. If there are situations that they're still fine-tuning in their systems. But I've gotten to ride with a lot of these companies, and it's pretty amazing how far this tech has come and how smooth some of the rides are. And you still get some that are kind of jumpy, but for the most part, they're pretty smooth. To continue the triangle going I-10 from Houston to San Antonio, Embark used to be there. Embark closed their doors earlier in the year. But Kodiak is actually testing out runs from Houston all the way to El Paso on I-10. And then they're also doing runs, actually, no, I'm sorry, they're not. But Aurora just started doing runs from DFW to El Paso. So a short version is on most of our interstates, we have AV freight deployers that are out there. And they're operating 7 days a week. Most people just don't realize it, they don't see those. I expect this map to continue to expand. Had a lot of conversations with companies that are interested in going further south, going to the border or going to more of our oceanside ports. So what that would mean would be more traffic going up and down 37 and 35, going northwards to the DFW area. So I would not be surprised, especially as more and more of the construction north of here continues to complete, that we'll start seeing more trucks popping up out there. Another one whose name I'll mention is Gaddick. So Gaddick does middle mile, but in a shorter distance. Gaddick is currently operating in DFW. They are expanding south. I know they've looked at some stuff in the Austin area, but it's moving within town. So these are AV box trucks that are moving a smaller amount of goods. In the DFW area, they're working with Walmart and a couple of other companies where every day they're making runs right now. So AV freight is here and it's going to continue to grow. That is the number one takeaway I would get from this. They're also looking at long haul routes now. So one of the great things about AV freight is that with AV freight, you don't have to have hours of service. You don't have to worry about your drivers getting tired, bathroom breaks, whatever it may be. They can just go. So they've been, the AV companies have been testing out routes between, on the I-10 corridor. So if you look at a map of the US, in the Sun Belt is where you're going to see the majority of AV testing taking place. Why? Better weather. They don't have to deal with lake effect snow and the heavy conditions that you get further north. They're not there yet. But they're really considering routes across the I-10 corridor and the I-20 corridor, going from, well, really it would be Arizona to Jacksonville or to Georgia, depending on the route. What these companies they're starting to test some of these long routes, and they're coming back with some interesting results, where they're saving upwards of 20 hours per trip, being able to do long distance runs. So we as a state DOT are really interested to see as they start looking at these corridor runs, how that's going to impact us from a state-to-state legal perspective. Every state has different AV laws, and depending where you go, some are a little bit more restrictive than others. You may be aware, and the reason I said from Arizona, there is a bill going through the California legislature right now that would require humans to be in any vehicle over 10,000 pounds. So in current law in California is you cannot test AVs over 10,001 pounds. The California DMV was looking at rules to change that. The California Teamsters got up in arms and have been moving a bill through the legislature. It's already passed through the House. It's got a complete passing through the Senate. It passed through their Senate Transportation Committee about a week ago on a 14-0 vote. They expect it to sail through the Senate and then probably be signed by the governor. So what that would do is effectively close off California for AV freight. It's a bit of a disappointment for the AV guys who are obviously are still fighting as much as they can, but it creates opportunities where I think we're going to see more and more of these companies coming here that were operating in California. Am I doing okay on time? Sorry, I get talking, I just keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions on the AV freight? Because I've got a few more slides for you.
Are they linking with the electric capabilities too?
Good question. So EV or EV freight in general on the larger side has been the slowest to take off. I'm trying to avoid puns as much as I can. The weight of the batteries, they're still trying to, and the cost of it, they're still trying to find that price point. As what some of these trucking companies have told me is when they're selling to their customers, $500 will be all the difference in the world. And that's how, at that point, that was about a year ago, that's how much more it was going to cost to use AV freight out there.
And then are they going to always just look like semis, or are they gonna try to think a little bit differently on how?
It's a good question. I honestly don't know. I think right now, they'll probably maintain the same. A lot of that has to do because they know that that works, that meets federal standards. Our highway patrol is comfortable with those vehicles. They meet height, size, width specs. So that I imagine they'll stay with them. But as everything continues to try to be more and more aerodynamic, I would not be surprised if there would be some kind of fluctuation. The other question with that has to do with the charging side of it. So even if these long haul trucks get up and running on an EV side, they've still got to charge, and charging an EV, forget the AV part of it, an EV tractor trailer requires a lot of power. And if you were to park these at say truck parking, and you had 80 trucks who were all trying to charge at night, that's basically a small city. So we are working in conjunction with the feds at trying to understand deploying new charging capabilities out there and how we would charge, how we'd be able to supply the grid for that. And that goes over to one of our sister agencies, the Public Utility Commission, but we're still involved with it a lot because of the DOTs were brought in on a lot of the EV stuff. To be continued, I guess, is the best way I can tell you. I know there are conversations with some of the big, like the Flying J's and things like that, about looking at these capabilities. We're seeing it from a passenger side at Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's is kind of, in my mind, the gold mine. If you get Buc-ee's to have large numbers of EV charging points, I think it would be successful, because if you put a class 2, so there's 3 classes, but the one that would probably be the most would be a class 2 charger for well, I'll just say a Tesla, an average EV to be able to charge, to go from near 0 to 80% would take about 30 minutes. When you go to Buc-ee's, you're going to spend 30 minutes. It's just, you can't not. So it works out perfect. Your vehicle's charged, you've done your shopping, spent $1,000, and now you can get back in your vehicle and go. I think when you see those kind of gas stations deploying more and more, I think you'll see the EV infrastructure continue to grow. It's still kind of an emphasis.
Just they're testing with the trucks, are they actually hauling cargo?
Yes, sir.
And what's the battery life on those?
For an EV, I honestly don't.
We're not live, we're about how those charge stays, like if your Tesla's gonna charge for 400 miles, once you turn on AC and you have load, it's not 400 long miles any longer.
Correct.
I just didn't know what the truck impact would be.
I don't know. My guesstimate would probably be 6 to 8 hours. So it would be a night.
Would those class 2 charge in the same short period of time
So
for trucks?
let's say your Tesla has 3 batteries in it, so it charges in 30 minutes. An 80 freight would probably have 8 to 10 at least, and they'd probably be bigger. So that's why it would take so much longer, even at a class 2. So ideally, it would be an overnight situation.
How are they handling the cargo?
As far as the AVs or the EVs?
The trucks.
How are they handling it? So far, so good.
When it gets to destination.
Oh, I'm with you.
Unloads it?
So typically what they do is, well, so there's a couple options. This is one of the things that we've been looking at as well. They can either pull to their own depots. So let's say Kodiak owns 2 depots, one north, one south. They pull it to their own depot, unload, and then the truck hauls up another one and keeps going.
Man driver takes it from there.
Right. So either they're in that situation, what we've been calling basically, for lack of a better term, a flipping station or
Trailer transfer port.
yeah, transfer port, thank you, where the human driver would take over. One discussion that we've been having on that, so I mentioned the Teamsters and the bill in California. They actually introduced that bill here in Texas, in both the Senate and the House. It got a hearing in the House, did not in the Senate. Probably wouldn't move here in Texas, my speculation. But they introduced that, the Teamsters introduced that 8 states total. I know they're going to introduce it again in the next round of legislative sessions. I anticipate the conversation is going to continue. One of their big arguments is their concern that AVs are going to take away jobs. Depending who you talk to, the Automotive Trucking Association, American Trucking Association says there are currently 80,000, there's an 80,000 driver shortage in the United States. In 10 years, they expect that number to go up to 120,000. Currently, the average age of a truck driver is 55, and that number keeps going up. So if that's the case, if I'm a 21-year-old who just got my CDL and I want to get into truck driving, I'm probably going to be able to retire as a truck driver. That's the route I want to go. But if we start doing transfer points, instead of me having to drive a week away from my family back and forth, well, every day I go and I work my 8 hours, I drive loads in and out of town, and I'm able to go see my kids play soccer. In theory, that could be, but some people prefer that longer route. So I think for the next generation or two, there's not going to be a problem. And the number of AV freight trucks that are out there, it's minuscule. These fleets right now are ranging in the 20 to 30 trucks, with maybe 10 on the road at one time. So the numbers are really small. You have to be really paying attention to see them, kind of thing. You'll see them more frequently on 45 because there's multiples of them. And like the Kodiak truck's got the big K. I'll come back here. But some of them you can't really tell. The second one is Aurora. Aurora is probably the largest. Aurora and Waymo, who is, I think this is the Waymo truck. They're very indistinguishable. They say their names on the side, and that's about it. We have had conversations with them about, well, let's make sure that you have contact information on there, because if something happens, how do we? There's a whole other conversation about interacting with law enforcement. Here in Texas, the DPS is very, very engaged, probably more so than any DPS in the nation. And part of that is our task force. They got involved very early on, but because of the number of trucks that we have, they're constantly meeting, engaging, and we're always having conversations about things called, like law enforcement interaction plans. So let's say we need to pull one of these over and there's no human, what do we do? Well, these trucks have so many cameras on them, they're gonna see the officer. In fact, anytime one of these gets on a collision, they're really quick to show you the footage and say, look, this wasn't our fault. And these trucks do get in collisions. I should knock on something, but so far every one of them that I've seen has been the result of a human error from another driver. As we know, the interstates are dangerous places, and people get distracted driving really fast all the time. And you see it in the film of people who just fall asleep or texting or whatever it may be, and they'll sideswipe one of these just randomly in a lane. It's our goal, and the reason that we have been following AV so closely is, depending who you talk to, between 92 and 94% of crashes on the roadways are attributed to human error. If we can reduce that number and save lives, that's our ultimate goal. We want to get everybody home at the end of the day.
Just a quick question out of curiosity. What is the price differential on an AV rig versus a traditional one?
So I don't know exactly, but I will say this. They have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on their technology. Every one of these trucks is worth millions. Every one of these trucks, let me see if I can find a good picture that I can really show you. This might be it. So right here are a series of radars. Right here are LiDAR on the side. They've got technology inside the grill, and then they have massive computers on the inside. Back here are cameras that are recording. Their line of vision is significantly better than humans, but the amount of technology they have on each one of these trucks is enormous. So right now, the costs are incredibly high. Ultimately, with a lot of these trucks, and there's two types of companies that are out there. There are those who want to be driving their own AV trucks, AV companies who are building the software to implement on trucks. So they're working with the Peterbilts of the world of being able to provide them with technology so when they're building cabs, they're building the trucks, when they deliver it to their customer, it already has the AV suite in it, and then they'll just be providing support in the background. So right now, what these guys and their contracts with the big companies, they're just doing contracts as a regular freight hauler. They're just moving the goods back and forth. And what these companies care about are our goods getting from A to B on time. Right now, they are. Any other questions?
On the drivers, so if you said they were operating more or less driverless, the driver's sitting there,
Mhm.
and the technicians in the other seat. What is the rest requirement? If the driver isn't actually driving, does he hit that 8-hour, 10-hour?
So those individuals would still follow those same requirements, but they're doing to either Houston, or they're doing to DFW Houston, to Austin, Dallas to San Antonio, or from Fort Worth to El Paso, largely. Those are the routes they're doing. So they're not meeting those service requirements during that route. And then they typically stop and switch cabs or switch drivers or whatever.
What about fuel savings? Are they noting any fuel savings?
Yes. So right now, they're still typical diesel trucks. They are finding that, kind of like when you put your vehicle into cruise control, the computer is saving you gas along the way, similar with the trucks. Okay. So I threw in a couple of others as well, just since they're in the Central Texas area. AV passenger. So you taking the family for a ride in an AV. It's happening now. Initially, there was a company called Argo who was working with Ford, who was testing in Austin. They launched briefly before Argo closed down, but now, Argo sold to Volkswagen. I am anticipating that they will be back in the Austin market within the next year or so. But right now, you can get a Cruise vehicle. So Cruise is probably the most well-known out there of the AV passengers. If you follow the news, there's a lovely battle going on in San Francisco, which is where they first launched their vehicles. Cruise and Waymo, who is Google's AV company, both have passenger vehicles in the San Francisco market. Cruise is now in Austin. I would not be surprised if Waymo's in Austin soon as well. But they're still working out a lot of kinks in their system. So anytime something happens, you hear about it on the news. And in San Francisco, there's been a lot of protest over it because there are some groups that are very vehemently opposed to AV passenger, and they're doing things like putting cones on top of vehicles, on top of their stacks. Their stacks have these things on top. In San Francisco, the Waymo ones have a stack on the front of the vehicle for putting traffic cones on them. And you'll see where these vehicles just stop. There was actually footage of 2 of them stopping in Austin over the weekend because one didn't navigate a turn, it looks like. So anytime that happens, I get a phone call. Because they're trying to engage with us regularly and keep us in the loop. So if you're interested in trying one of these, go take a drive down to Austin. Right now, you can get one between the hours of 8 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. And take a ride as they're still soft launching here in Austin. I've had colleagues who have taken them. They said, I've heard everything from, well, it took a really long route to get where we were going, to, well, it let me off a little bit away from where I wanted to go. So there's still some kinks in the system, but you can download their app, the Cruise app. It's got a C in the orange color that they have there, that the C is not white on the app. It's orange as well, but you can get on a list, and within a couple of days, you'll get a code to be able to go a shot. It's kind of neat. I rode in the Waymo one in San Francisco. I was there a couple of weeks ago. They have Jaguars, which is pretty nice, but they're tiny. But it was smoother than my own driving. And the questions that we've had along the way, from a technical standpoint, of things like taking an unprotected left turn, they are mastering now. Is it perfect? No. Is it getting better and better? Yes. And I think you will see, and they're operating at L4 right now. You'll see more and more of these, and they're going to expand across. It typically, well, what I've seen is they start in Austin. They like Austin because of the way Austin's laid out. It's very densely populated in a small core. And then they're looking to migrate to the Houstons and DFWs, and then they're going to expand more and more into smaller communities, I anticipate. So, the other one are our little delivery robots. These you will see more likely on a college campus near you. So there are two types of these, but the ones that you see the most, in fact, there was, I don't know if anybody remembers, back in the Super Bowl, I think 2 years ago, Domino's brought back the Noid. So everybody remember what the Noid is, the weird creature with the ear? And they were operating out of Euro vehicles. They had a partnership in Houston, they still do. And it's kind of a sign that delivery robots, especially during the pandemic, they were huge. Because it became, everybody has to have a pizza. When you're stressed, you got to have your pizza, and these robots can deliver you a hot pizza in a small distance. So we've seen them all over. And in Texas, we have two different types. There are the smaller ones, these ones on the bottom, and then the top ones are the neighborhood electric vehicles. So three main distinctions. The NEVs, the neighborhood electric vehicles, they can go on the roads. You'll see them on neighborhood roads. They have VINs, so they are registered vehicles, and then they can go a little bit faster than your personal delivery devices. Your little PDDs will go up to 20 miles an hour, the NEVs can go to 25. It's actually a big difference when you start seeing them operate. And then the way our PDD law is set up is that the cities can set up their own law or rules in some of the gray areas in the law. The laws that we wrote them are a little broad, and so cities can come in and tighten things up if they notice things. So kind of like if anybody's had experience with the scooters when they first came out and nobody knew what the heck and they were everywhere running over everybody. We're starting to see this with PDDs. We're starting to get a little bit more laws on them. So PDD.
You guys have
yes, sir.
do you have like a model ordinance or example of the city?
I tell everybody to either go to the city of Austin, because Austin has several of them. Frisco was one of the first, and Arlington. Arlington has a few that are still operating. But this is kind of an idea of where they are. They like cities and they like college campuses. Again, densely populated areas and people who are willing to engage with technology. College kids love it. In fact, college kids like to do weird things to them. But they're still continuing to grow out. And excuse me, in some of our universities, in some of the smaller colleges, we're starting to see in places like Stephenville and Seguin, we're starting to see little KiwiBot. And KiwiBot, as I talk to them, are very ambitious in where they want to go. If it's a college campus, they're looking at it. And if there are dorms, if there are certain layout, certain criteria, you'll start seeing it pop up. Because again, it's a young audience who's really, really interested. Okay, and the last one I'll talk to you all about is the aerial side of things. So this is the next side for it. So back in 21, our legislature passed a bill that directed my boss's bosses to create an advisory committee on what we were calling urban air mobility at the time. So that it's looking at everything from drones to VTOLs to everything in between, that next level of aviation, everything from 0 to 500 feet. That's moving goods and moving people. They asked us to take a look and say if there were any state laws that needed to be addressed, and they gave us a very, very short time frame. We had the legislature convened at the end of May, and we had to turn it in at the end of September the following year. So it was 14, 15 months, and in government time, that is sprinting at lightning speed. It came upon my shoulders, so I had to try to put this thing together. When anytime you're dealing with the government, right, you have to get, it goes through a lot of steps to get a final approval, and it took a while. So we went through a whole process of literature review, trying to get an understanding of what it was, and to learn who all was out there. And Surprisingly, there's a lot of interest in this around the state. I should say unsurprisingly, in a state like Texas, but, and it's taking place in a lot of areas. We formed an advisory committee. We launched that December, and we finished our work in about 8 months. We had to bring, actually, I'm sorry, it was about 10 months because we had to bring the band back together because there was one area of hostility in it. The big topic that goes through this subject, and you may see it here because they had it recently in College Station and in Plano, is where should aerial delivery, drone delivery, Amazon in College Station, Walmart and DFW area, where should they be able to fly? Should they be able to fly from A to B in a straight line? Or should they follow navigational easements, aerial roadways? Should they follow the interstates, the highway, whatever that may be? Depending who you talk to, they should do this or they should do that. Industry wants to be able to fly from A to B because it's most efficient for them. But we as homeowners may have concerns about that, right? Do you want one of these landing on your house, or is it going to be really loud? There's a lot of questions that are going out there. We looked at the debate. We didn't have a lot of time, so we tried to avoid it. We couldn't. There's a healthy discussion about what role the feds, the state, and cities should have in this conversation. Ultimately, FAA regulates from blade of grass to the infinite sky. But there's a lot of discussion based off some very old court rulings about what impact the state and city should have in determining the answer to some of these questions. I tell you all this and that the committee has been reestablished by the legislature. They wanted a little bit more from us. We didn't have a lot of legislative recommendations. We made a lot of what we called foundational recommendations, safety recommendations, things like that. But there wasn't a lot in state law that needed to be addressed. One thing we told the legislature was give us a little bit more time. We want to dive into this a little bit more in depth. We want to engage FAA and more of our local partners in understanding the future impacts of this and trying to get some answers. So this is coming back around. Our aviation division is going to take more of a role this time. That just means I'll be less involved. But they're really going to try to get into a lot more of the technical side of things. Again, I'm a policy guy. So if you have any interest in this, one, you can go to our website, just type in urban air mobility, and you can find last year's report. But if you have interest in participating this time around, let me know. And I'll make sure that we get your name to our aviation division as they're forming the group for this next iteration.
So with these type, do they have IIF on?
Some do, yes. So it depends. Like your little small drones, right? But when we start talking about eVTOL, vertical takeoff, yes.
I just wonder, because in this area is a great example, you have helicopters that operate around here. And they operate less than 500 feet in most cases.
Mhm.
So if there's no IFF on them, it creates a hazard if they're not following a defined path or flight corridor.
So FAA just came out with a ruling 2 weeks ago, less than that says that now every aircraft in the air has to be able to be recognized. So.
I want flag, I mean, that's pretty broad.
Well, they need to be broadcast. You need to know what they are. I can tell you that a lot of people probably are not going to, especially mama, if I had my little
drone I have at home.
Yeah. A lot of people aren't going to retrofit those kind of things. So we talk regularly with our colleagues over at DPS who watch the skies around the Austin area and airports and things like that. And the amount of aircraft that are out there is interesting. And then there's also what goes on south of here. As I like to refer to it, the aggressive entrepreneurs to our south,
yes.
Who are always looking at new and creative ways to move their product north of the border. You hear tales of ranchers who are finding very advanced drones crashed on their property several hundred miles from the border. Because if you're loading up a $20,000 drone that can fly 300 miles with solar panels to deliver 10 pounds of very high quality drugs, you're willing to wash that 20,000 for the 3 or 4 million that you just made, or in the market to make. So there's a whole additional conversation that goes on. It's funny, not really funny, but we talk to people and the drone advancements that have taken place because of the Ukrainian war have been in and of itself fascinating. You'll always hear military conflicts, advanced technologies, and this is one of those situations where what was found very early on is very primitive Generation 1 drones could deliver deadly ordinances very efficiently. And it wasn't until they started introducing counter techniques, jamming techniques, things like that, that you started seeing, okay, now we got to go to the next level, and it's one-upping each other. It may have been the Wall Street Journal had a fascinating article just on, they were on the front lines with the Ukrainian platoon who was operating drones, and it's really interesting just how it's impacting what Walmart's and other companies who are in Amazon's, the weight capabilities they'll be able to do as these drones become able to carry more and more loads. About a year or two ago, there was a kind of in the industry, it was kind of a wow moment where it went from Walmart went from being able to deliver less than 5 pounds to product between 5 and 10 pounds. That just opened the door for a whole new dichotomy of goods that they could deliver. So now people could order more. And in the DFW area, you have companies like Wing who are delivering Bluebell ice cream. So hey, you gotta have your Bluebell on a hot day. I get it. The big question is how do they deliver it cold? But apparently they can. And then Walmart Goods and College Station, Amazon is doing limited deliveries with their drones, and it's going to continue. So I think that's it. Yep, that's it all. I apologize if I went too long. Once I get talking, I get talking. But happy to answer any additional questions. And if not, thank you for inviting me out here. I appreciate you reaching out. And always, please don't hesitate if y'all ever have questions on what maybe you're seeing something out there in the media, or you're getting inquiries from a company that may want to come out here. I'm always happy to let you know what I know. And the only other thing I would say is you will see them on the interstate, and 99% of the time we know they're here, but if you see one and you don't know one, you've never seen it before, let me know. Because if there's something out there, and I don't know it, I need to know. With that, thank you.
So the next one is the overview of Texas Freight Mobility Plan, policy and funding recommendations.
All right. So like you mentioned earlier, we have the freight mobility plan from the state. It's been approved. It's gone to the FHWA, I believe, for final approval. Its last 5 chapters are a bunch of recommendations for policy, programmatic, technology, and operations. And then concludes with the freight investment plan, which lays out next steps for funding. So just to go over the policy recommendations first, I highlighted a few. In your packets, you will have the full list of policy, programmatic, technology, and so on recommendations. We have the link to in the staff update for the full plan. I would encourage that you read that whenever you have time. Just to pick out a few here, one of these policies here is that TxDOT should implement the freight infrastructure design considerations on the highway freight network. So what those design considerations were was from a TxDOT report, or the final report from 2021. There's a bunch of recommendations, things like acceleration lane length, vertical grades, lane widths, outside shoulder widths, and things like that. Additionally, they had a policy recommendation to invest in multimodal strategies and solutions that are linking different freight transportation modes between air, trucking, rail, and so on. There were 2, I only have 1 on there, but basically it says first, the state should continue to address freight transportation issues for urban areas, and then the other one's for rural areas. For rural areas, it calls out agriculture, oil, gas, supply chains. TxDOT should continue to invest and pursue innovative strategies in ServiceNow, which is the existing asset preservation policy for the highway network. And still on that one, TxDOT should continue to work with the private sector rail industry and other stakeholders to ease traffic congestion, accommodate projected growth for imports and exports. And lastly, under policy, it recommends that the state investigate additional options for funding and financing flexibility for different transportation projects related to freight. As far as programming, a few that I picked out here was that I recommend the state continue to develop, integrate, and administer a comprehensive and multimodal freight planning program. So different plans and other deliverables like that that help improve freight planning across the state. It also recommends a statewide freight technology-based solutions program based on finding from another study or plan, which is the Texas Freight Network Technology and Operations Plan. So a whole bunch of connectivity and different data analytics tools that could be used to help improve freight efficiency. Another is the state should continue to advance safety and mobility, of course, in the highway freight network. And lastly, in the programming is that it recommends the state rail plan, which was last updated 2019, be fully updated, and of course involve passenger and freight railroad stakeholders in that. As far as technology and operations recommendations, a few that we had in there was testing and deploying the Texas Connected Freight Corridor system, as well as deploying smart freight connector technology on the freight network to enhance connectivity between modes and expand different multimodal options, as well as developing a rail crossing traffic management systems, integrated traffic management operations, data exchange, and so on, safety warning systems, statewide truck parking availability system, some automation strategies, and then also help develop freight mobility hubs while expanding broadband. So, and the broadband obviously to improve the efficiency and operations of all the different technology. So the freight investment plan at the end. So this was kind of based off of the TxDOT's normal 10-year unified transportation plan. So what it did was it used what was called a freight investment optimization tool. It looked at that unified transportation plan that TxDOT has, determines which of those projects listed in it are considered freight-centric, meaning the purpose of the project is specific to freight, or that's freight supportive, which just means it's a project that may tangentially benefit freight in some way. And all of those projects that were scored either freight-centric or freight supportive are part of this freight investment plan. So they have what's called the unconstrained and the constrained plan. The unconstrained, or rather the constrained plan really has what's already set to be funded completely or mostly funded under that unified transportation plan. The unconstrained component for the whole freight investment plan basically includes different projects that are either unfunded or outside the 8-year window of the constrained plan. So basically all the unfunded are projects that are outside the window for funding. So basically identifying what projects are needed to address gaps and where they need to put in more funding, which is one of the policy recommendations. So this is just a few tables showing the number of projects they have under each category in the freight investment plan. So you can see there's stuff a lot over asset management and mobility, the most in safety, and then a few on connectivity. That's constrained, unconstrained, and then we had rail called out specifically here. So you have class 1 railroad, short line, and freight rail. There's several dozen projects for those. That's the brief overview of the freight rail plan. We might get a TxDOT speaker in the future maybe to talk about, delve deep into some of these policy recommendations or kind of elaborate more on the actual investment plan.
Any comments or questions on that? If not?
Just a reminder if the passenger is included in the freight or not.
No, the freight will mostly just be commercial stuff. The passenger isn't really a part of it. It's entirely on the trucking and shipping and rail delivery and stuff like that.
Next one, item 7, is a discussion on local freight topics.
All right, so this is our usual agenda item where it's open to the committee for discussing local and regional freight needs, issues and problem areas, anything that you'd like staff to be aware about, ideas maybe for future agenda items, future speakers, but especially issues and needs and gaps you've seen. We've talked a lot about truck parking. I would actually like to ask a question about the AVs. And I wanted to ask earlier, how would that affect truck parking demand? I mean, like in the future, whenever you eventually reach L5, I mean, you won't need a human in the trucks themselves. I mean, they would only need to stop to refuel or recharge. And how does that affect that?
So just to that point, if they don't need to, if they're going depot to depot,
Right.
And even at L4, when they pull the drivers here in the next year or so, they will not have to pull over. Those are spots that will be free for drivers to be able to fill. So it'll help. Now, granted, it's a small number. Right? Now, as the fleet grows, then I think you'll see more and more of an impact. But if you read the freight reports, the amount of freight that's going on the roadway will continue to increase significantly. So it'll be negligible, I guess, initially, until maybe 20, 30 years down the road. There's a large number of these vehicles on the roadway that maybe will get on the other side of that now. There is a truck parking conversation that's been going on. Over the last few years, we've been engaged with other states, especially along the I-10 corridor, on just that topic. We're trying to build some form of network to be able to communicate with freight drivers about what's open and what's not out there. Our hope is, as more and more vehicles start sharing information with each other, that we'll be able to get that information out even quicker. More to come there. I don't see any alleviation in the near future.
Okay. So that's still a few decades away before we go into kind of full
Probably.
automation.
Well, at least a dense enough part of the population of the vehicles out there that those lots will start emptying. I think we've got a
All right.
With the railroad elimination grant coming up in September, I know that we're going to submit a pretty large project, but probably get more traction if there was other areas in MPO that also wanted to fix some of the safety issues. I know between like Rogers and Buckles, there's a bunch of signs there indicating like the truck is going to get stuck on the rail if they go over these points. And I've had trouble going over a couple of them with my just a horse trailer. So there might be some needs out there that from smaller communities that don't know that opportunity is available.
Can I talk about the project you guys just are wrapping up right there by City Hall?
On the reduce the rate, we had to make it a one-way in order to like fix the grade on it.
Because that had been a problem for years.
Yeah, and the only way that BNSF will get involved is if it helps them some way.
Yeah.
You understand? And so the one that I'm submitting doesn't do a railroad crossing elimination, so they kind of like back off on how energetic they're going to be about it. But if there's some other ones that are, you know, they have several crossings, it doesn't bother them to close one, I might be able to use it in my application in exchange. We make theirs safer, the ones that are going to stay open, something like that. So it might be worth just asking around or sending a blast out.
Yeah, definitely, especially whenever the NOFO opens. And we get more details on how it's going to change.
We call you to figure out who your man on the inside of the BNSF is.
Nope.
Come on.
That's all over.
We did have Jared Garman before, who was on the board. He's left BNSF, but they did let me know they will have somebody else who will be joining the committee. Representing.
I mean, it's known where to start. Moving around the table.
One of the issues we found with the railroad is getting products moved in for customers that don't have on-site locations. So this goes into transloading, which doesn't create a lot of jobs, but it solves a lot of freight issues with getting the bulk of the materials to the center where they need it. So we're looking at real estate that's available along the BNSF or the UP, either one that is zoned and would accommodate that sort of activity.
We have some spares you can use.
Okay, all right. I'm getting that, yeah. Over in Roger State.
No.
Nolanville, okay, you're in Nolanville.
Back off, lady.
Let's
talk about Temple.
No, you
Yeah, it's, they don't, the Translo's gonna bring a lot of jobs to that location, and parcels of land usually, there's already a plan for them. So like where we're at with our railroad, we don't exactly have a place, but maybe there's somewhere local to Temple. And there's like the last opportunity we had to pass up was, EV batteries coming from, California, and some other batteries that were going to a solar farm nearby somewhere. They don't tell you all the specifics.
Right.
So some of it is important to get to our area as close as they can get to where they need them.
Right.
And it's just a reoccurring. There's always somebody calling or coming to the door. Hey, do you have a way for us to unload this material? And right now we don't. So we're in the early stages, looking at real estate and seeing where we can do those types of activities.
It really seems to reach out for our agency too, because they own a lot of property up there in the industrial park.
Yes. We've been working with them.
Yeah.
They kind of have a vision for it, and, some of the transloading, if it's done properly, I think we could find something there, which, if the lot and everything is developed to the same standards as everything else in the industrial park, and it's not just a dusty, dirty, eyesore that's creating truck traffic, which is what they would want. So if it's done properly, I think if we can find the property there, we can do something like that.
Similar to what
Both.
y'all looked at Cove and Fort Quebec.
Yeah, the installation, they submitted, there's a non-competitive grant in now that's being evaluated.
Yeah.
That date's a 2018 study, but it's focused on containerization. So I think what I would do is, it would up the planning to, because the previous study focused on commodities that were in Central Texas. They either came in or went out. They didn't look at containerization. So this one's focused exclusively on that, because a lot of the cargo that comes into installation could be containerized, and shipping it out is always containerized.
Right.
It would go over on the west side near the current railhead at Fort Hood. And it would be potentially a P3 operating facility. Fort Hood is like Jordan Hughes Airport. Fort Hood would get priority when they have an urgent requirement. Otherwise, they just plan on as long as everybody else, and you can commercially do
We can probably do it cheaper
All right.
We've got one that's less future thinking, more of immediate needs. Texas has been working on getting a project on Loop 363 up in the industrial park area between industrial and Lucius and Kelby. Adds more of the main lane section that hasn't been constructed yet, and do some grade separation on the two intersections. So now you're gonna have more free flow traffic. You've got Wilson Art, HEB, Walmart, FedEx is the newest logistics up there. So for the short term, they're gonna tear up that road and it's gonna mess up their traffic flow. But long term, it's gonna be an improvement. So that project, we're looking at bids going out February of next year. So I don't have an official timeline when it's gonna start, how long it's gonna take yet, but sometime in the next 12 to 24 months, your commute to work is probably.
Well, that's a good project. That's a project that I support. That's
Yeah.
those intersections need improvements. As there's been more growth in the industrial park, there's more traffic that wasn't there before.
Yeah, they asked us if we would, there's one Encore tower that has to get moved. So they asked to see if we would participate in the cost for the utility relocates. We said, of course, because we don't see it.
Right.
That's kind of our big news.
I look forward to that.
Yeah. Anything else? If not, we'll move on to the next one, which is any public input.
Yeah, so KTMPO regularly collects public comments online, emails, through public hearings, meetings, social media as well. So the most recent public input we received, this was up through June. So this was the Facebook community page from Copper's Cove, and it's a response to the public meeting. The other one was in person, anonymous. So let me see, he didn't actually read this one beforehand. He got posted about the Great Divide in US 190 in Lampasas County in Copper's Cove area. Right, Brown, just POC. All right, the other one was concern about narrow bike lane on 57th and McKeska's Barbecue.
That one turned out not to be a bike lane, it's just where the white striping on the frontage road comes around. And the person thought, that's too narrow for a bike lane. That's not a great place to ride a bike, either the frontage road over that area. either.
I'm like, where the bike shop is though.
They're further down on Avenue M. But I wouldn't be riding a bike on the frontage road.
Did someone send you that first one, or did y'all just pull that? Because
No,
Copper Skull Hot Topics is sort of like
Yeah,
taking place.
it's a KTMPO social media feed.
Yeah.
You remember?
I was
Yeah,
curious.
I pulled it.
Okay,
I pulled it, yes.
but you know what they're talking about?
Yes, there was a,
The bypass, that
yes,
area about the bypass is going to be widened to 4 lanes, I'm sure.
I
yes,
think they were talking about the Brownwood District project. That one.
yes.
Well, see, the bypass,
They're talking,
there's 1 mile of it in the current plan that's actually Brownwood District, and the rest of it's going over.
That one was about the public meeting that was held in Lampasas for a portion that was tag on to the bypass
The
project
bypass around
from-
Lampasas.
through Big Divide or between 2657 and Big Divide. That's what they were talking about.
If you go that way now, when you go around Cove, there's 1 stoplight you have to stop at.
Yeah.
Project eliminates that stoplight. It'll be 4 lane, no stoplights all the way to Lampasas.
Yeah, and it would extend it to Big Divide.
Yeah.
Over Big Divide.
Grade separated then?
It'll
Yeah,
have to be.
26.
Just like the one before there. Yeah, the one right before that's great separation. It goes over and everything goes under. This would be the same. Then you'll have 4 lane divided all the way from Lampasas to I-35. So you'll get more freight traffic potentially from the 281, 183 corridor that could come up and cut over and work goes out.
Interesting. And, I mean, we talked about freight topics. We had our member comments. Any other member comments on number 9? If not, we talk about possible agenda items for October. And I'll float one because the Gulf project will just close. So would it be possible to have a presentation if there's any major, especially a text dot, you know, like the one we've got coming? Are there any major roadway projects that might have an impact on freight, either improve it or they need to know that they're being worked on? That might be a good update to have either from staff or text dot.
Have we heard anything else about potential money shaking loose with the larger projects that are making progress?
No, I mean, so as far as funding and stuff, I mean, the big thing that I mentioned was MPDG from the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Well, there was some discussion with Victor and some other folks that
Oh, yeah.
TxDOT thinks that they may end up having to reprogram several $100 million because of the larger
Right.
projects running into one and environmental
No, I
issues
haven't
that
had,
got solved
I haven't
for
heard any updates on
public
that.
comment. And part of that goes into the finish in 14 for Rogers because that's the end of the Waco district.
We did a white paper for them to basically be their lobbyist, for lack of a better term. I haven't heard.
I said, I haven't heard when they're going to make the decision about the money reallocation.
Right. I haven't heard anything.
Because these guys like to build roads, not sit around and watch. That's what they get paid to do. They're good at it.
No updates on text dot that I've seen.
Did you send out the I-14 message that you said, y'all sent me?
Somebody was
Somebody,
gonna say, yeah, that came
the
out.
public comment piece to go in.
Yeah.
It wasn't me, but it's on the KTMPO.
Hope sent that.
Yeah, Hope sent that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I knew somebody said it. I just
Yeah.
remember who off the top of my head. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get it? Cameron? Which doesn't affect y'all as much, but.
Yeah, no, we are actually, the Bryan District, of course, has its own study that it's doing. And Cameron will be hosting the first leadership committee meeting in the west section of Aspen in early August. So the date's not set yet,
Set yet.
but yeah, looking forward to that.
And Hope, thanks for sending that. I shared that with a bunch of the folks in our side.
I did want to add though, for the infra, mega and rural funding I mentioned, the deadline was up is August 21st.
For submission.
Yes. So, yeah. Deadline is by August 21st, 11:59 p.m. So coming up.
Honest question in terms of scheduling, is October 24th, does that seem to be doable?
Treat yourself for it.
Yeah. Austin?
I mean, if it turns out somebody has a conflict or if something major comes up, reach out to staff. Figure out an alternate time and date. If there's no other discussion, then we are adjourned and we'll see you in October. And thanks again to Mr. Rayner for doing this.
Yes, sir.
So I have two questions for you. Do you have contact information for those little food delivery robots?